Welcome to The Random Sample, a podcast from MACSYS, the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for the Mathematical Analysis of Cellular Systems. In this podcast, we share stories about mathematics, statistics, and data science, and the people involved in these sciences. Our host for this episode is Dr. Haripriya Sridharan, a postdoctoral research fellow with MACSYS at the University of Melbourne.
Welcome to The Random Sample. I'm so excited to be joined by our two guests today, MACSYS Director Trevor Lithgow and Deputy Director Jennifer Flegg. They also represent the two sides of MACSYS, the wet lab and the dry lab sciences. Trevor is one of Australia's leading molecular cell biologists and leads his own lab at Monash University. Jen is an applied mathematician at the University of Melbourne, an internationally established academic leader in mathematical biology. Thank you so much for joining me.
Great to be here.
So, Trevor, you're a molecular biologist, and Jen, you're an applied mathematician, and now you're running the same centre together. So, could you give us a snapshot of how you both ended up here?
I'll start. I think this is a great strength for MACSYS, that we have a directorate where we do cover the opposites of the disciplines that are contributing into the centre's research agenda. We have lots of great conversations, almost never about specific research, but actually about how we're going to make sure that the research efforts are complementary, how we're going to make sure that all of our strengths are catered to. And so I think this is really fantastic. I would also say I've learned a lot from working with Jen about mathematical biology, some things I thought I knew that sort of were right, and other things that I now realise I understand much better. So yeah, it's really great to have this sort of leadership team, I think, and hopefully the rest of the centre agrees.
Oh, that's amazing. How did you end up in biology?
So it's one of these, we'll go back into the distant past, because this was something that, like when I was a little kid, that was a fascination. So it wasn't that it was a smart move to study biology. It wasn't that I knew what a university was, let alone what a biologist did, but it was literally as a kid, always being fascinated by like birds and animals, but also worms and bugs, and having lots of pets and wanting to know, how animals work and how they interact with their environment. And then I think for me, at the risk of being too self-indulgent, the critical thing was when I was in year 10 and David Attenborough's Life on Earth series first came on television, and every week I would watch it, and every week I was thinking, I want to do something like this. I want to understand things in these sorts of terms.
That's amazing. He is a legend. Jen?
I guess I ended up as part of the MACSYS executive and deputy director, because so when Trevor stepped into the director role, I was just really keen to make sure that MACSYS had representation, both from the applied maths and computational side, to match the biology side. So I thought it was really important to have that diversity. It's worked really well. I've learned a lot from Trevor. He's able to distill some of the experimental stuff down to actually that's, just this experimental technique. You don't need to worry about the complication and the detail. It's very, very good to be able to bounce ideas off someone who understands the biology so well.
That actually brings me to a question that I was very, very curious about. So they seem like worlds apart, maths and biology. I know mathematical biology is a flourishing field, but mathematics and biology, how hard is it to communicate across these disciplines, across the divide? And I want to hear from both of you.
I think it can be very challenging. Mathematicians, their sets of tools are often quite abstract. They deal with equations and theorems, and that's often something that doesn't resonate with biologists. It might be something they didn't like in high school or something that they've stayed away from at university. So to lead into a conversation with biologists with a theorem and a proof or a whole set of equations is potentially not the best way to communicate. So you need to find a way to communicate your theory in other ways, usually in pictures or schematics or some other representation.
Yeah, I guess following on from that, it's also true to say that one of the reasons that a centre of excellence like MACSYS is such a timely thing is that a lot of biology now has to move into a more quantitative space. And so the biologists that we have in MACSYS, the chief investigators, the associate investigators, and the partner investigators who are biologists, they are working in those terms. So trying to come up with numbers of molecules that will do a thing, or the exact size of a membrane that will determine its properties. And so in a sense, we're venturing into mathematical land anyway. And that means it's so much better to have friends, ready and waiting to explain things to you or to, drive things forward. And I think also it's probably worth saying that in terms of the way MACSYS works, it's actually the new mathematics that's being developed and the new ways of looking at biology with mathematics that is the main driver for how we do our research. And it is therefore important that the biologists can keep up, because we want to make sure that everything we do mathematically is biologically relevant, and also, I've been told, and I keep repeating, biologically sensible, to make sure that where we end up will be useful, both in terms of the mathematics being the best that it can be and also the most impactful that it can be, but also to make sure that we can use it on biological problems that will be worth the effort.
Oh, that's really interesting. On the flip side, how hard is it communicating biological concepts to mathematicians?
Yeah. It's it is tough, but I would say it's probably a similar sort of thing. So when we talk about biology to colleagues who are mathematicians, statisticians, computational scientists, there is a certain amount of, I would say, human endeavor. So you actually have to just start by saying, I don't think you're the dumbest person in the room, but I am going to speak down to you. I'm going to simplify things, and then you can ask me questions and we can build up the level of knowledge. Because oftentimes you don't need to know all the biology. You can trust the biologists to take care of that. But sometimes you do need to know a lot of the biology. And so I would say that one of the things I really like about this group of people in this centre is that people are very generous in terms of not, having thick enough skin that you can just have a conversation and someone is happy to ask the question, can you tell me again what DNA is? And, we don't then go, why are we working with these people? It's actually sure. And I can explain it in terms of what you need to know for the thing that you're currently thinking about. So I feel like I've noticed that, and that's true of all the people. So not just the senior investigators, but it's true of the research fellows, it's true of the students, that people are becoming more and more comfortable with the idea that there are people who know stuff that I don't know, and I can ask them questions and they won't think I'm a dummy, and it will be a good conversation that'll start from those very simple questions.
I do have a question about the kind of mathematics that's involved, but before that, maybe I'll backtrack, and for listeners, including me, what is a whole cell model? What are we trying to build here? I'd like to hear both of your perspectives on this.
Yeah, I can go first.
Sure.
Because I feel like the most important element, so the most important perspective on this will be the mathematics. So I'll jump in with the biology side, and then we can come to Jen's explanation that'll round it all out. So from the biological side, the way we view a whole cell model is not in terms of the mathematics, even though that is the key element of a whole cell model. The way we're thinking about this as biologists is that, we can roll up our sleeves and do years of work in the wet lab with real cells in real, cultures, and putting them onto big machines and really grinding out all of the molecular detail of what they do and when they do it and why they do it. That's what we're used to, and we can do it, and we do it. But what we imagine when we think about what the whole cell model will be is a virtual cell. So literally a cell that lives in the computer that's not a real cell. It is a mathematical description of the cell, and the computational people will be able to put that together inside the computer based on the mathematics that the mathematicians are going to put together, so that it is a genuine representation of the biology. And this then will be, a really tractable system also for biologists to use, where you can ask questions of that in silico virtual cell in the computer that you could ask a real cell to tell you, but it will take years and this will take minutes. And so that means we think that this will progress the speed with which we can start to ask smart questions and develop new ideas about how cells work. And for most of it would then be applications in the real world where, a company that wants to be able to grow a cell to do a certain thing will be able to use the model to determine what they should try and do, rather than using us to say, well, we'll spend 6 months on it and we may or may not get there, but you'll have to pay us anyway. So I feel like the biologist's view of a whole cell model is a cell that isn't a cell. It lives in a computer, but it does all the things that the cells that we work with experimentally do, and it does them faithfully.
Oh, that is simply astounding, because we're not here yet, but to think that that might happen in a few years, that is amazing.
Can I just say, I love that Trevor thinks it's going to take a couple of minutes to run this cell on a computer. It's not going to be a couple of minutes. So same question for me, I guess.
Yeah.
So for me, similarly, I'd come at it from a biology perspective first. So I think a whole cell model needs to have more of a holistic view of the cell than a specific mechanism just in mind. So if something's modeling metabolism, that's all well and good, but it needs to be a whole cell model, needs to connect that to other cellular components to be a holistic view of the cell.
Indeed.
Whether or not a whole cell model has to actually include all biological components is up for question and debate, because it is a model, so it's going to be a simplification in some sense, and it depends on what sense that is. I guess the other thing for me is that the model part here, it could be a mathematical model, but it could also be a statistical model, and could be a computational model too. So not just mechanistic modeling, but also computer science, so thinking about machine learning models, or even at the intersection of these fields, so using mechanistic modeling with artificial intelligence or machine learning.
Amazing. So do you maybe perceive a few different layers of whole cell models, a few different types?
Absolutely. There's definitely not just one type. There's going to be many different types, and there already is many different types of whole cell models to different people. And so I think one of the powerful things of MACSYS is bringing together biologists, mechanistic mathematicians, modelers, and computer scientists. We have the ability to have biology-informed, mathematically driven, but also really computationally clever designs of whole cell models.
So Jen, I imagine, so you obviously have many different kinds of mathematicians involved in this project. Why do we need so many different types of mathematicians, and what types of mathematics is involved?
Lots of different types of mathematics. So there's more traditional applied mathematics in terms of mathematical modeling, systems of differential equations or partial differential equations, but also more pure mathematics. So thinking about how a system can have its properties abstracted to learn more about what can be discovered without having to do lots of simulation, because as I'm sure we'll all find out, simulation is really expensive. And in order to calibrate, so some of the existing whole cell models that are out there, they can only run over a very short life cycle of a cell, not even a full life cycle. So how are we going to run multiple life cycles of a cell to, see mutations happen and to see, evolutionary properties start to emerge? That's going to take more computational advances. So I think we need to think about that when we're developing whole cell models.
So the listeners may not be experts in mathematics. You said mechanistic modeling and other types of modeling as well. You might have to perhaps...
Sure.
Yeah.
So mechanistic modeling is thinking about some perhaps physics or chemistry or biology and trying to write down equations that capture those governing processes. So they often, when you simulate these equations or these systems of equations, the properties that you've modeled will fall out naturally. This is very different to something which is data-driven, so something like machine learning, where you don't impose the mechanism itself, you just provide a set of data which may conform to that mechanism, and then you just let the data speak on its own.
So MACSYS does have a research theme around automating whole cell modeling. What does that entail? Is this too hard to do by hand?
Yes. So historically, some of the whole cell models that have been developed took many, many years of individual research fellows working on reading literature, extracting things from literature, parameterizing lots of different pathways in metabolism, and lots of other things as well. So automation can be used to take care of this process for you. So you can upload into a system multiple different PDFs or files of papers, or it could be databases, and you can ask AI, machine learning, to extract useful information for you. Or you could use machine learning to highlight in papers every particular word that you're looking for. So you can extract information without having to do this reading and do this extraction yourself.
That's really interesting. Just to tease that out a little bit, how is that not entirely sufficient? Why do we need more other kinds of mathematics?
Because the number of papers has just exploded. We just cannot sit down and read all the biological literature. And even if you could read all the biological literature, you'd need someone to bring it together in a way that made sense, which would also take a lot of time. So this is just a way to use your time in a more smart or careful way. So we don't have to do the reading, but we can use what comes out of the machine learning and the automation process.
That's amazing. So Trevor, if wholesale modeling really succeeds over the next decade, what's the world going to look like? How different is it going to look from your perspective?
Well, that is a big question. So I think, I guess it prompts me to think about two things. So one would be in terms of the science. So biology will be done differently. And that's one of the things that I think I think we can expect that it'll happen within the term of this Centre of Excellence. The ARC Centres of Excellence run for 7 years. So it's not a short time, but it's also not a very long time in a career or a person's life. So one thing is that we are already training a generation of biologists who are going to think differently about how cells work. So, the way in which undergraduates and postgraduate students understand how cells work is oftentimes very descriptive. And this is not I'm not disrespecting anyone in this, not the teachers, not the students, but conversations that you would have with students, for example, working in the lab, they start from a point of view of a very qualitative, sort of descriptive idea of a cell that has, a membrane and it has some molecules and so on. And all of those things are kind of blobs in a cartoon rather than molecules that are doing things the way molecules do, biochemically. So I feel that this is already going to change things because there will be a generation of people, the people coming out of our centre are going to go and interact with all the people at their home departments and, where they go next for their jobs, where they'll come at it with a different viewpoint and that viewpoint will sort of propagate. It's ironic because I would say probably in the 1970s and 1980s, that's how people thought when they thought about biology. And then it went through a period of time where it became more descriptive and in many ways attractive, but also complicated unnecessarily because there are some fundamental principles of biology that are quantitative and they can be understood in those terms. And that's why it's so good to work with mathematicians when you're thinking about it that way. So I think the way we do research will be different as a result of this, generation of people that will be coming out. And then I guess, more broadly speaking, the idea that you would have computational models of how a cell works, that'll change things in industry because, MACSYS, we haven't said it yet, but we'll say it out loud now. So MACSYS is working deliberately on models of bacterial cells and yeast cells. We've chosen that ground because they are amongst the simplest models. So scientifically, that's a good idea, but also because those are organisms that are used all through technology. So there are industrial processes that require bacteria to do certain things. Now we will be able to future-proof some of the problems that those processes have. We might be able to scale up and optimize the outcomes that come, which changes the economics of the process, and engineer things to do things a bit differently. So if you've already got a process that works to give you product A, we would have an opportunity to work out how to make that same process give you product B in case that was of some commercial advantage or something that hadn't been done before but could be done. And yeast are so important primarily in terms of economy and what might happen in terms of winemaking, beer making, and bread making, right? So, and especially in terms of winemaking and to some extent beer making, these are things that make a lot of money for a country. There are some fantastic people in Australia, for example. The Australian Wine Research Institute is a fantastic operation that takes care of that whole industry. They have scientists who are always looking at, the products in the wine that gives flavour, that gives stability over time, the best ways to actually make the wine in the fermentation process. And we think, and in fact, we're partnered with AWRI because we both sides of the partnership thinks that this will be a way to have virtual cells where you can have a virtual yeast and you can understand why a certain thing happens or try and make sure that a bad thing for the wine doesn't happen. So I think, it always sounds silly when you say, oh, it's a game changer, but I do think that there'll be some really big changes that
All the
come
more
out.
reason for many more people to be interested. So you mentioned bacteria, so that had me thinking. Your background is in, well, you've been doing a lot of recent work in antibacterial resistance, which obviously the World Health Organization recognizes as one of the biggest threats to global health. Do you think maybe, this is just a wild question, do you think maybe whole cell modeling could help?
I absolutely do, yeah. Not a wild question, a really great question. So that is something we talk about a lot in the centre. So there's two things to say. One would be this idea of antibiotic resistance with bacteria is also, like conceptually, it's also true with antifungal drug resistance in fungi, yeasts. And in fact, the world is totally unprepared for, a pandemic that would be driven by fungal parasite what am I trying to say? Pathogens. So we're unprepared for, fungal pathogens. There's not enough drugs to treat them. We saw already during the AIDS pandemic and again during the COVID pandemic that so many of the people that died didn't die from the virus that caused the primary infection. They died from the fungus that got on board in the secondary infection. And it's terrible, like the numbers of people is terrible. The way in which people have to suffer as a result of these fungal infections is terrible. Yeah. And it's likewise true with bacterial infections as well. So we, working on bacterial systems and working on fungal systems, yeast systems, we think that there is a contribution to be made towards antimicrobial resistance. Our centre, unlikely that the sort of work we do would lead to discovery and development of new drugs. But there's plenty of people who have plenty of good ways of trying to do that. And new drugs primarily, in terms of this AMR threat that the World Health Organization recognizes as so deadly, the new drugs, that's primarily a problem of economics. It doesn't make economic sense for the companies to go out and develop new drugs. And there's reasons for that, but we probably won't touch on that. But one of the things that people don't usually think about, and very little research is done, is why is it that these bacteria become drug resistant in the first place? And the obvious thing, and the thing that people used to think, was it's in a hospital because doctors are giving too many drugs, and as a result all the bacteria are becoming drug resistant. And so the blame is on the healthcare professionals and the hospitals and so on. And it's really unfair because that is a contributor. But there are many health systems, like in Australia, where that sort of bad behaviour, just blasting things with drugs unnecessarily, doesn't happen. What we know is a major problem that whole cell models could really help with is that much of the drug resistance that goes on in bacteria and in fungi happens out in the wild, and it's not because there's lots of drugs out in the wild, it's because there's other things, pollutants and other things out in the wild that are driving the phenotypes of drug resistance even before these bacteria have seen the drugs. So we do think that the more we model and the more we understand about how bacteria would develop any phenotype, which is one of the things we want the models for, to tell us why do they behave the way they behave. That's a phenotype. The more we look at that, the more we understand it, the more we would be able to say, well, here's the evidence that if you put too much cadmium in this soil, this is going to happen. And when these bacteria, which are being carried around by people, end up in an infection in a hospital or before the hospital, you've got an untreatable infection. And so we do think that there's going to be ways in which our whole cell models can be important in making sure that, good decisions are made about trying to push down the levels of drug resistance. I probably talked too long there. It was a long answer.
That's really interesting. I found that very insightful myself. So you're part of a centre of excellence, and it's not just a group of 5 researchers just working together. It's an entire community, and it has many more goals than just whole cell modelling, which is, of course, the most important goal, but it goes beyond that. Tell us a little bit about that.
So some of the things that we're trying to achieve beyond our ultimate goal of whole cell modelling is to train up the next generation of mathematicians, computer scientists, but also biologists to work at the interface between disciplines. So it's a really unique opportunity for someone coming from a non-biology background to be able to go into a lab to see what what it involves, to see how hard it is. And I guess vice versa for someone who does mostly lab experiments, to see what it involves to sit down at a computer and code a model, or to simulate a model, or to do some mathematical analysis. And I think this is not an opportunity that students are naturally drawn to or have the opportunity to have, apart from something like a Centre of Excellence. Most biology students might not take some maths, and most math students might not take some biology. So this is a really unique opportunity to get students trained in both. And I think moving forward, their career prospects out past MACSYS are going to be much improved from having the opportunity to work inside MACSYS.
Yeah, I totally agree. I just sort of to add along as well, when the ARC funds a Centre of Excellence, it has multiple expectations. We have we have difficult masters, but in a good way, because while delivering a wholesale model would be like an outcome we're aimed at, just exactly as Jen said, also, as she said, the legacy of the centre won't be the wholesale model, because by the time we've delivered our wholesale models, the way science works, that will then open things up so that every person can make a wholesale model. That's what we're trying to do.
Indeed.
And then the wholesale model itself will not become the special product. It's really important, it's groundbreaking, and it's why we do it. But the legacy of a Centre of Excellence are the people. And so that goes for, from the most junior students all the way through the research professionals that are working on the wholesale model. And it is all about trying to build a community and make sure that people feel comfortable working across disciplines and at the boundary between the disciplines, which I totally agree is exactly where the most exciting stuff happens. So we take that very seriously. Like, the ARC funded us to do something like that. And so all of the decisions we're making through here are always coloured by the idea that we want to give professional development opportunities and career development opportunities to the people who would come and join the centre, so that they can do their best work and deliver, the best that they can towards a wholesale model, but also so that they'll become the next generation of people who go out to lead research programs and do all sorts of different things. We take that really seriously. And that would be, I think, when we finish this Centre of Excellence, the thing that would make us feel really happy won't be did we or didn't we get the very best wholesale model anyone's ever seen. It will be about the number of people whose careers succeeded because they worked as part of MACSYS.
Oh, what a beautiful human note. That is so lovely. So you were talking about students. So let's just talk directly to the students listening. To a student who is perhaps very good at mathematics, but is maybe overwhelmed by biology, or maybe hasn't even considered biology. Or on the flip side, a student who is excellent at biology, but perhaps intimidated by maths, or think that they don't need it. What do you both have to say?
I guess I'll come more from the perspective of someone who's in the mathematical sciences and maybe hasn't had much experience with biology. I think, it opens up so many more job opportunities. There's a lot more jobs when you consider maths plus biology than if you're just trained solely in maths. So I think often students are quite surprised that this is even a thing, that you can combine maths and biology and actually go get a job. So I think it actually opens up more opportunities for students. I think at the undergraduate level, it's completely surprising for maths students that this is something that they could even consider.
Mm.
Yeah, and I think the flip side is equally true, that, most biology students would, you're absolutely right, that very many biology students would be intimidated at the prospect of having to do any maths. But others would be feeling comfortable with the idea that they did maths in high school, they like maths, it was all very good, but it doesn't fit with my biology aspirations. So I do think it is surprising to undergrads to hear us talking about, we're biologists, but we work with mathematicians. It'd be like, why? But I think it does make a whole lot of sense. And it is about job opportunities. It is about distinguishing yourself so that when you go for a job, you're able to stand out and show that you've done things differently. I would also say from the biologist point of view, now that we are well and truly in the age of AI and computational everything, it's about adapting, right? It's a very biological concept, but you have to adapt to a changing environment. And so biology students really do need the opportunities that would come out of a centre like this, but also other, training grounds where they will take on, computational science, and they will take on mathematics, and they will take on, all sorts of ideas of automation and quantitation when they're studying biology.
So you think that going forward, biology students and biologists in general will be much more maths literate?
I hope so, and I do think so, yeah.
Thank you so much, both of you, Trevor, Jen, for this wonderful conversation. I have learned a lot. Everyone here has learned a lot, and hopefully there are many more fascinating conversations to come. And thank you so much, everyone, for listening to The Random Sample.
The Random Sample is a podcast from MACSYS, the Australian Research Council Centre of Excellence for the Mathematical Analysis of Cellular Systems. If you'd like to find out more about MACSYS, the center's website is macsys.org, and make sure to follow MACSYS on LinkedIn. We are proud to have the support of these partner organizations: the Australian Data Science Network, the Australian Mathematical Society, the Statistical Society of Australia, the Optima ARC Training Center, the Matrix Mathematical Research Institute, and ASIMS, the ARC Center of Excellence for Mathematical and Statistical Frontiers, which created the podcast. You can find The Random Sample on LinkedIn, Blue Sky, and X, formerly Twitter. Our email is hello@therandomsample.com.au. Please make sure you're following us wherever you get your podcasts. Leave us a rating or a review, because we think stories about maths, stats, and data science are worth sharing, and we want others to find out about them as well. Thanks again for listening to The Random Sample.